This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey!
Hello and welcome to Shipwrecked and Comatose. I'm your host, Mark Adams, and with me at this time is my regular co-host, Kurt North. Hello.
Hello, mate. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm very excited about Series 3. We're on episode 2 now. We're looking at Marooned. But it's not just you and me, Kurt. We've also got the returning Matt Latham. Hello, Matt.
Hello. I'm glad to be back again. And to be fair, I'm surprised you invited me back considering the Christmas special. So I would have thought I'd been banned.
That Christmas special was definitely a thing.
It happened. It was.
But Matt, you picked the first 2 episodes of Series 2. You picked Marooned and then Backwards last week. Was there any particular reason why you picked that 2 out of the run?
I think it was mainly because, Backwards is like a good episode, and it's one of the things it's remembered for as well. But the one I really love to talk about, and this is one of my favourites, Marooned, it's up there with Thanks for the Memory from the previous series, which I definitely did remember, and you haven't edited out the last time where I've forgotten what the name of one of my favourite episodes was. But this is the episode the 2 that I really wanted to talk about and come on, because I absolutely love Marooned. I love this episode. It is one of my favourites. It's like probably in my top 3. I love this episode.
Interesting. And we've not actually had any kind of dummy throws or disagreements between our 3 regular guest hosts about which blocks they wanted. You all seem to have picked something each time that you genuinely like as your favourite pairing for that season. And I think that's really indicative of how brilliant Red Dwarf is.
I jumping ahead, there is, I think, a Series 7 episode that I would have thrown the dummy out if I wouldn't have got. But thankfully I have got.
Didn't you get in first?
Probably. That's probably why, yes.
There was definitely episodes that I wanted to definitely be on. But I'm on them all.
Yeah, you're on all of them, Kurt.
I'm all right.
And there's definitely a Series 10 episode which I think I was first come, first serve as well, that I probably would have also thrown the dummy out as well.
A little bit of kind of backstage for you there, folks listening in. We've got a Google sheet where the co-hosts can put their name down next to which episode they want to do. And no dummy throwing. Kurt, we've got some very well-behaved co-hosts.
Give it time.
We've not done too bad. We've picked a good posse, I think. I think we're doing all right.
But we're looking at Marooned, which is Series 3, Episode 2. And I think, like Matt says, it is a very, very popular episode of the show, which very much focuses on the relationship between Rimmer and Lister, like it has done on previous series, but it's definitely a big kind of relationship between these two.
Yeah, it's the pretty much your basic formula for comedy, where you've just got two mismatched characters in a room interacting more or less like a stage play. Or like Porridge or Steptoe and Son, where you sometimes have just like 2 characters for extended period of time in a confined space, having to live with each other. And I think this was the, particularly for Series 3, as it moves on to a different kind of storytelling. I think this was perhaps Grant and Naylor trying to do at least an episode that harken back to the bunk scenes of Series 1 and 2. And making sure that they do have plenty of an episode which they can say is the Lister and Rimmer episode.
I wonder whether it was budgetary to some extent, because the vast majority of the episode is in one room.
The bottle episode.
This was the cheap episode.
Yeah, but I think that allows them to play to the strengths, and I think play to the strengths of the characters. And at this point now, it's the original 2. and Marcus, I know as much as you love the cat, he was definitely secondary in the focus, particularly in the first series, to Lister and Rimmer, who are like the main force, and probably still are even in the later series.
But Matt, it's quality, not quantity.
Yes, of course. But I think this is just like to remind you that these two characters, they've got chemistry that works, and it's also great character exploration as well, and just fleshes out and perhaps already fleshes out and introduces the concept of conflicting continuity to the backstories of the characters.
There's definitely some continuity shit going on here. Let's get into it. It opens up with Holly telling everybody that they have to abandon ship and that all the airlocks are being opened on Red Dwarf. And that's not a drill. This is a drill. And whoever's editing it could maybe put in the noise of a drill. Or not, because it's not me.
I'll say I'll do it and then don't.
But regardless of whether you do that, Kurt, it is a great gag. It's a great gag, and it made me laugh within seconds of the show opening.
It is great. It's a great idea to do that when you're editing, but then I do just get so lazy. I'm like, nah, I can't do it. But it is, and I love. Oh God, the siren's broken. Awooga.
The humour doesn't really change from Holly to Holly. Hetty Hayridge's portrayal is just as dry as Norman Lovett's.
It is, and I think even like the first episode backwards where they're talking about the newspapers or it's about lunchtime, maybe 1:15. It's almost like you can see Lovett in Holly, and it's still like you're still seeing the same character. And obviously in the spiel it does say that, but
I really love Hattie's. Is it Hattie or Hetty? It's Hattie, isn't it?
Hattie Hayridge, yeah.
Yeah, I really like Hattie's portrayal and delivery. It's so well timed. She is a talented woman, and you only ever see her face, so it is mostly kind of nodding and her voice rather than any advantage that the other actors might have with their body language.
Well, I think there's a slight difference in portrayal with Hattie Hayridge as well, whereas Norman Lovett has this deadpan kind of cool, calm exterior of whatever he says. He's like, yeah, so that's what it is, unfortunately, yeah. Whereas Hattie Hayridge always seems to feel like on edge because she always has that thing where her eyes kind of look off screen, like she's expecting something to appear on the side. So she has that kind of different interpretation. It's kind of like the Doctor, where like the Doctor is the same character, the same characteristics, but there's a different kind of style to it. So Hattie Hayridge's Holly has this kind of like at times where she's deadpan, but is constantly on edge. Whereas
she's quite skittish, isn't she?
Yeah, and it works with the character. It works with the character. I mean, like I don't think probably people will say that they probably prefer Norman Lovett, but I've always liked the both of them.
Me
I always
too.
liked both of them, and
I've never compared the two really. I mean, I know that, like I said there, with you can see Holly, not necessarily the character portrayal of him, but you can I think the Doctor analogy is perfect because it's the same character. It's just a different, in this way, it's just changed the actual concept of him and the actual maybe some subroutines or something like that actually plays in, but you can still see it's Holly. It's not it's not quite the same, but it is the same character.
Yeah, it's like you can picture Norman Lovett doing the thing about space. Yeah, it's black, and the thing about black holes. Yeah, they're black. But I mean, you can picture how Norman Lovett would portray it, and it'd be very similar. But there's enough difference to feel fresh.
Yeah, and I think this episode at the beginning, after not really giving Hattie Hayridge the time to shine in the last episode, really did give her that opportunity. The first few minutes were all about Hollygags in the control room and, Rimmer interacting with her. And yeah, I really, really liked this scene because she's brilliant.
Yeah, definitely.
So moving on, Rimmer and Lister are loading Starbuck because, as we know, they've got to abandon ship, and they've got a Javanese camphor-wood chest and a guitar. Basically, it's the prized possessions of Rimmer and Lister, respectively. Rimmer's saved lots of money, but has borrowed money off Lister, which I liked, but we talked about how these things date the programme. They're talking about £2,300 and £5 book tokens, which was probably about right for riches and a relatively decent birthday present in 1989.
It was £24,000 though, wasn't it? It wasn't £2,000.
Yeah, it's like 20,
Was it?
There's
Yeah.
5 figures, I think. Yeah.
24,000?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And even so, the money isn't very much. That's a deposit rather than a house, which it probably would have been a house in the 80s. And I feel like stuff like this isn't something you can predict. Like we were talking about Helen Shapiro and Peter Beardsley on previous episodes. You can't really get your head around what money will be worth 30 years down the line. Whereas Peter Beardsley won't be in defence for Everton in 30 years' time. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So
I
guess it's a little bit more forgivable.
Yeah, I think it's there's a few bits in this episode that actually does this where it's not it's aiming at it, and I get your point because of obviously they've gone through the whole Norweb thing in previous episodes about how much it's worth now and you're on the world kind of thing. But the concept of the 15 quid and he got a £5 token back is just to show how stingy Rimmer is.
Yeah, it still works.
It's that gag, isn't it? So
yeah, it works, but 15 quid to £5 now, £5 wouldn't get you a book, whereas in 1989 it'd probably get you two.
Yeah.
And so Kat and Lister arrive and tell them they're going on to Blue Midget with the food and the medicine. And Kat has only got 36 changes of clothing and 10 mirrors. Poor Kat.
And my favourite cat hairstyle so far.
It was magnificent, wasn't it?
He's looking
It's like
incredible.
a mohawk. Like a weird, kind of mohawk with a ponytail. It was brilliant.
It was beautiful.
Considering Danny John Jules and isn't in the episode that much, that's dedication just for that small amount of time on.
And Matt, is that the dress? The dress code that he wore that was changed to yellow later in the season, later in the show, wasn't it? I think this is the costume that was changed.
Is that the zebra print one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right.
Because that was in the 3 Million Years where, because they used that same coat again, but they kind of. Did they colour? What did they colour it with?
They coloured it in yellow. Yeah, it was yellow and black rather than white and black. So they used it
didn't they use
later on
felt
for
tips or something, or
sorry.
Or did they use markers? I can't remember how they coloured it.
Oh, I can't remember now. Yeah.
It's still cheap as fuck, isn't it?
Yeah, it is great. It is my favorite so far. It's definitely my favorite suit that he's wearing. Favorite costume as well so far.
And did you notice that they had Spectrum joysticks on the consoles?
Yes.
No.
It was an old school Spectrum joystick on the console. And I mean, it's always been a bit naff. But that was like, oh, for fuck's sake, I had that joystick. I played Dizzy with that fucking joystick.
Hey, Mark, right? Star Trek Insurrection, right? Which was like 1998, so probably like a good 10 years after this episode aired. Now, bearing in mind, this is a feature Star Trek film. Number one, Will Riker, I think it's Insurrection, actually has a panel that comes up and it's pretty much the same joystick.
For fuck's sake.
It's like, I saw that and you're just like, oh, I don't tend to like sort of exhale with a lot of things in TV shows and movies. I don't really have reactions, but I just saw the joystick and was like, no, you can't have a Starship Enterprise and with a joystick that's from a Spectrum. It's just not possible.
Unless that looked dated by the time we got to Games Master.
Yeah.
Unless Riker really into his retro video gaming. So
that's true. Yeah.
That was a character. That was a character trait they really should have put on in there, where he basically he comes to the bridge and he's basically late to his onto his shift because he spent ages trying to press the shift and run stop button on a Commodore 64 because it wouldn't run, or he's trying to unspool a tape cassette.
You'd think that in Star Trek, everything would be backward compatible as well, wouldn't you?
Or just all ROMs and emulators.
Anyway, we're getting distracted, blah, blah, blah. Holly is going to navigate black and rendezvous with Starbug and Blue Midget after they've taken alternative routes. And on Starbug, Lister is dicking about with Rimmer's stuff. This includes wooden soldiers, and Lister questions why he's obsessed with war, considering he's such a coward. And I really like Rimmer's take on war, because it really is the kind of snob's take on war. And he says that bar fights aren't like war because they're not noble. And people really do think like that.
Anything, pretty much that was the view of war before the First World War.
Yeah.
So I think the First World War, when you pretty much had the wars of attrition and trench warfare introduced with and I think it was basically pretty much artillery and guns. I think were first really used in semi-automatic guns anyway, were first used in the First World War, and that kind of like took the, for lack of a better word, sport out of it. Whereas I think before the First World War, it was more of a noble defending your own country type thing. And I think
it's really creepy and sad that after the First World War, people do still think like that about the nobility of war. It's really well done and really icky. And I guess it's supposed to make Rimmer look like an outdated fuddy-duddy, and it definitely works.
Yeah, because I think a lot of his books, I think a lot of them are probably pre the World War. I think, with the exception, I think Patton, but everything else seems a lot more based in the kind of
stuff like Nelson and stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, like Nelson, Caesar, Napoleon. And to be fair, Napoleon's actually been popped up quite a few times, so there's quite a good character, quite a good consistency in terms of that. Because I think it's Better in Life, where he meets, he goes, "You're my most favourite dictator," and
and I guess there's an element of Rimmer having a bit of a Napoleon complex. He's not physically small, but he kind of sees himself as mentally small in a lot of ways. So I think maybe that's why there's so much Napoleon.
Yeah, and I also think as well is that because he's always had the goals of being in command or an officer or a general, and I think, and he's always probably inspired by these kind of strong, kind of very male, very like proud, masculine kind of.
Yeah.
He
romanticizes it, doesn't he? He kind of romanticizes the whole aspect of it.
That's a great word, romanticizing, and that's exactly what he does. And I thought it was really creepy and sad, but also a really good depiction. And then, of course, there's the line, "Stitch that Jimmy," which is obviously this week's quotable Red Dwarf. Whenever I was a kid and we were talking about bar fights, it would be "Stitch that Jimmy." And I never really thought about it, but it's kind of not racist. It can't be racist if they're Scottish, right? But it is a stereotyping of Scottish people as people who get into bar fights, and never thought about it until I rewatched it recently. And now I was like, maybe I shouldn't be saying that.
It's funny you should get that, because I've never paid attention to that line ever. It's funny when you've said it there that I've actually realised they've actually said it.
Yeah, but it's a Scottish stereotype, and I never ever thought about that.
I've never noticed or paid attention to that line, but
it was one I always liked as a kid. But that's interesting, because most of the time when I've done a quotable Red Dwarf, you've at least nodded and said it was,
Yeah,
great.
That's season 3. Things are changing.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll
Yeah.
have one episode where I haven't got a quotable dwarf in future. I doubt it.
Did you have? What was the one last week?
The one last week, it was. I would go with.
I would go with thing, wasn't it?
Insert, but I'd be thinking of insert.
Yeah.
Do that all the time.
Just before we do move on as well, the one thing I do like, I mean, Chris Barry is obviously often someone who we talk about his rubber face and stuff that he does with, and he does it in this episode as well. But I do like the scene when they talk about the hacienda. And when Lister says he's running out the door, and he sort of does this running face with like a cross-eyedness, and it's something that comes across a couple of times in the show, where Lister pulls a face, or for example, when his memory gets dumped and he goes cross-eyed and stuff, and he's got this comical face that he pulls out occasionally. But I always find that hilarious when he does that move and that scene with the space bar. And it's interesting that they actually call it hacienda as well.
I think somebody somewhere discovered that Craig Charles could do that and was like, "We'll use that." And then moving on, Rimmer says that a hypnotherapist once took him through his past lives, and he was Alexander the Great's chief eunuch. And and the fact that he's so proud.
I think it's the idea that at least he was associated with someone, no matter what he was. But again, it's a strange thing considering he's the second from last ranked person on Red Dwarf. So like, considering he said he was proud that he was a eunuch, which was what I don't know what the command structure of the Alexandra Palace was, but it was probably the same rank as he was on Red Dwarf. But I find it weird I find it interesting.
I just find it interesting. I mean, it works towards the end of the episode as well that Rimmer's a person who we often know has got no balls, and the fact that he's the chief eunuch and they have no balls was a particular thing. I think they were like literally the lowest of the low, weren't they? They were like just like servants to Alexander the Great. So, and the whole point of it is that they weren't distracted by things that their sexual desires may attain, which is interesting in Rimmer's character as a whole, because you never quite, even though he's often talks about his sexuality, there's always that feeling that he's either trying to, we've talked about this before, trying to portray a particular way of what he thinks it is compared to what he actually is. So I think it's an interesting character trait.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they've had a kind of go at Christianity in the past with the stuff about the Bible, but this is the first time they've kind of gone for Hindus and Buddhists, isn't it? And I wonder whether that's something that they did deliberately because they had a dig at Christianity previously, or am I thinking about it too deeply?
You have to remind me of the reference to.
Yeah, I'm struggling to think of the reference.
Well, reincarnation is Hindu and Buddhist, isn't it? As a concept.
Right. Okay. Right.
But they're mocking it with him being a eunuch.
I don't think it's the mocking of the concept. I think it's more of a case that. I think it's more of the case that it's Rimmer trying to latch on to a legacy, to some kind of legacy that he admires, which again, if you think back to the Rimmer family, apparently the Rimmer family are actually a very competent family of generals and leaders that he's already a part of anyway. But he's just not naturally predisposed to do that. So he seems to latch on to other legacies that he's trying to, and then finds some loose thing on. So he finds, oh yeah, I'm somehow associated with the Alexandra, so I'll latch on to that. Whereas technically he's part of this lineage of like successful generals and leaders.
Yeah,
so
maybe you're right.
So it's more like a reflection on himself, and with this, say, in the past lives, from a scientific point of view, it's likely that it's more his subconscious like reflecting on where he stands in his family kind of hierarchy.
Yeah, maybe it's more of a tool than a dig, I suppose. Whereas the stuff with Christianity was clearly a dig.
Yeah,
I think that was more explicit. I don't think this is. I mean, I think it says something that when you mentioned it being a dig at Buddhism and Hinduism, that me and Kurt struggled to figure out what he was on about. I think that probably means that I don't think it was meant a dig at that.
Maybe not.
Whereas I think the Christianity one from, I think, with the cat Bible and stuff, that was a lot more explicit and a lot less subtle. Because I don't, as much as I love Red Dwarf, I don't think Red Dwarf does subtlety in terms of that. So
no, maybe you're right. I just guess that it came across to me as a very pro-atheist show in the past, that maybe I've looked for something that isn't there. Okay, no worries, moving on. Lister says to Rimmer that he is clearly unhappy and should live for today. And at the moment he says that Starbug is hit by a flaming meteor and crashes onto a snow-covered planet.
Can I just jump in just before we go to that section? There's something that I picked up on, and I don't know if it was in the minds of them moving forward, but he starts to explain some of the. He says Lister says, no wonder you're such a good singer. And obviously, in relation to the unit kind of thing, which was great. I mean, I did my music exams was on the castrati, strangely enough, but then Rimmer says, well, maybe it's rot, I don't know, but it's funny to this day I can't look at a pair of nutcrackers without wincing. Fair enough, good joke. But this bit here says, and why is it whenever I'm in a large group of women, I have this overwhelming urge to bathe them in warm olive oil, and then bearing in mind what happens later in seasons where we get an alien kind of creature where he's tied up and being soaked in olive oil. In is it Sirens, the planet one, where they end up on Rimmer's planet, and it's all his internal thoughts.
Oh, where he's like, yeah, I never thought of that.
Yeah, it only dawned on me on this watch just before coming on. It was like, oh, hang on, that's nice, interesting cohesion between the two, that he thinks about this warm olive oil thing, and it actually comes within his psyche later on, which is a nice, again, what Matt was saying, a nice little touchstone on some kind of continuity there.
I mean, each to their own. If you're into olive oil during sex, good for you. No judgment here, but it's not for me.
It's not for me.
Matt's gone quiet.
Sorry?
So there's the random slapstick scene that seemed to me was just filler, where Lister's in a big coat and falls over for no real reason. I missed something here.
No, they used BBC Antarctic footage, apparently, for that section.
I think it's also just to establish about why they can't leave Starbug, because I think it's just like, I think it just does a good job at just saying that it's actually really perilous out there, so they have to stay in Starbug. I think, and he does it in kind of a very good slapstick way in terms of just being thrown against what essentially might just be a white cardboard box.
Fair enough. And so when you're back inside Starbug, Rimmer is desperately trying to make Mayday calls, which aren't working, and they've already nearly run out of food. They've got some Bonjela, some dog food, and a pot noodle. I've never got the pot noodle hate.
Oh, same. I love them.
Yeah, I quite like a Bombay bad boy. Do you like a pot? Right. We'll do a poll here. I like pot noodles. Matt likes pot noodles. Kurt, do you like pot noodles?
I can't have pot noodles.
Why not?
Because what are noodles made of?
Wheat.
And?
Egg.
Correct.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm allergic to egg, man.
So you've never had a pot noodle?
Never had a pot noodle.
Maybe the people who wrote Red Dwarf are allergic to egg.
That explains a lot.
But there's a lot of pot noodle hate. Anyway, Lister's worried that he'll die and that they're running out of wood. And some of Rimmer's books he has a look through those, and they all have foodie names.
This particular
Harold
moment.
Pinter was a particular favourite of mine. Because it's Pinter and it's like a clever joke for people what like books.
Yeah, and they have a fascination with topics as well, don't they? 'Cause topics keep coming up, and I do like the way they said, "Let's change topic. Stop talking about food."
At this point, I was like, "Do you know what? I haven't had a topic for years. I really want a topic. Can you even get a topic?
Maybe in pound shop.
What
maybe.
is I don't
It
know. What
does,
is
so
it?
you can get
Topic?
topics.
It's a chocolate bar, man. It was like got nuts in it and caramel, and it was like a shit Snickers,
What's the one? Did it have like fruit in it?
maybe."
If it had
I
fruit,
feel
in
like-
it, I've tried it.
I feel like it's been about 20 years since I've had a topic. Okay, so he asks Rimmer to take his mind off it and asks him how he lost his virginity. And we already know that Rimmer's only had sex with one girl. But apparently he's had sex with someone else, Sandra, in the back of the car. And this is the first of many acronyms. Acronyms? No. What's the fucking word? Anachronistic?
No, anachronistics when like you see a TV aerial in the back of Downton Abbey.
Bollocks, right. This is the first of many flubs that, with continuity, has gone to pot. I do feel like this is the episode where you spot that continuity's gone to shit. Because it was supposed to be Yvonne Magruder.
I mean, it's that big that even Mark's agreeing to talk about it.
Exactly. Well, I mean, it's one of my favourite bits. That many? And they've ruined the that many joke. Devoed.
But I think this whole conversation leads to, I think, some of my favourite bits as well. But it's a shame.
Right, okay, I've got an idea.
Right.
Here's an idea for you, right? So, Rimmer is a unreliable narrator, right? The fact that he will often think or try and think of what people want him to say. So the fact that he's trying to do that, and not only that, and I was going to touch upon this anyway, Lolita, the book, it has some serious issues with, which we'll get into, but that book is based on an unreliable narrator as well. So you could, if you wanted to, Mark, put it in that category of being, it's just that Rimmer's being unreliable with his facts because of, the fact he wants to, he's put under pressure and he feels like he's got to make something up or hide something.
That does have a lot of merit to it.
I mean, that probably explain why he ends up talking about the car over the girl, actually, as well. Whereas when he was talking about Yvonne Magruder, he was a lot more Magruder focused. I'll just say.
Yeah, and he was drunk, wasn't he, when he was talking about that? So that almost like could be the fact that his guard slipped there, whereas like at this point he's more like, oh, I don't want to talk about anything. You know what I mean? So there's that element that you could use.
Good point, well made. I'm not sure it's true, but still, it's believable.
Headcanon.
Yeah. And Lister obviously lost his when he was 12 on a golf course, and Rimmer is mortified that he wasn't a member of the golf club.
That's one of my favourite bits in the whole show. I was like, virginity when you was 12? 12? 12? But you couldn't have been a member of the golf club then.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's not exactly Mark's quotable stuff, but I have kind of a habit of, particularly stuff like that, because of this, I will try and latch on and make a comment completely unrelated or just basically as Rimmer as possible. In fact, I had there's like an ongoing joke now where if my friends are posting like selfies or pictures with themselves in, I will then just start randomly commenting something in the background. Oh, that's a nice path in the back. Or like if there's like a, it was someone I worked with who just used to always send like post selfies of herself and stuff, and I was saying, oh, that's a nice bathrobe, or that's a nice bath, that's a nice like tell rail, and I'm convinced I got that method of thinking because of this scene and because of Rimmer. You just latch onto or focus on the uninteresting bit. So, but I just love the delivery. I just love the build up. It just kind of goes on. It goes past what you normally think a joke would be. Chris Barry knows the timing perfectly. 12. He says the word 12 a bit more than perhaps he should have, but then he goes, "You couldn't even remember the golf club then." And the way he just hits it, it's just pitch perfect, and it's one of my favourite jokes in the whole show.
It's the timing. It's the timing element of it. I mean, it was an interesting, because I won't claim ownership of this, but the Rob Grant, Ed By, and I can't remember the third person who was talking in the quarantine YouTube about this scene, and the question came up, and I know we've talked about 80s Ick before, but the question came up about whether or not this would get past the compliance people nowadays. The fact that he lost his virginity at 12, so that was something that came up. And when I was kind of like researching for this episode, and again this goes to the Lisa thing, that I think probably where the 12-year-old thing came from was that the Lita novel itself is it talks about the guy Humbert who's obsessed with a 12-year-old girl sexually. Yep. So it's kind of like, where has that come from there to some regard? And on a separate note, Rob Grant actually admits that it was him that lost his virginity on a golf course, and he said he hasn't told anyone that before. So, but it was an interesting discussion about that 12-year-old thing, because I know we've talked about things like this before, but it was an interesting thing to talk about.
I think there's something about it being a man losing his virginity at 12. If it was a woman who'd lost her virginity at 12, it would be much more controversial, I think. There's a certain level of bravado amongst men about how early they lost their virginity and stuff like that maybe you don't have with women.
I think culturally and in stories as well, there's a different, I don't want to say different opinion. If an older female and a younger male doesn't seem as taboo as the opposite, if that makes sense.
I feel like at the time this was filmed, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Maybe significantly less so now. But yeah, even now, there's a very much a bravado thing when it comes to men and not having lost their virginity. You know, the term virgin can and does get used as a term of abuse amongst men, which I don't know how much it's used amongst women. Yeah,
but I mean, it's interesting itself on the way that Lister portrays it, because he's not saying he's a man, really. It's more matter of fact in the way that he says it, and it's almost like he's looking up to that girl who's brought him into that world, if you know what I mean. It's like almost like the gateway into it. And we'll talk about sort of the time 1989 and stuff like that. Then there's an interesting debate to have with whether or not, as I say, where does that lie with that idea and that thought. And you're right with the way it was portrayed there, but the question is, the question that they were asking is, would that get through now? I don't think it would.
Probably not for something that isn't supposed to be super gritty and doesn't have swearing in it and is broadcast at 6:00 on BBC Two. It would need to be post-Watershed for sure. It's definitely something that I didn't immediately. I'm normally like bang on for 80s ick, but because it was a fella, I didn't pounce on it like I would have done if it had been a girl. I think maybe that says something about me.
There's a lot of ambiguity about the girl. Anyway, I've always assumed that they were the same age.
Yeah, so did I.
Actually, I didn't. I assumed she was slightly older. I'm not saying by much, but I was envisioning like someone that was 16, 17-year-old.
But it's not made explicit either way, so I think maybe
there's definitely ambiguity in there. Yeah.
Maybe it's ambiguity is what's made us all think slightly different things.
Yeah. Also, and there's one of the other lines that I always seem to remember, and I think I've also used it as well, is the one where he says, "Oh, everyone knows but what happened when you lost your virginity." Like when they put the toupee to cover the hose on later, when Cliff Richard was shot. And I've often mentioned the clip when Cliff Richard was shot. Like when just random stuff. Like, oh, it's when so-and-so, when Cliff Richard was shot, and so-and-so, and so-and-so. And sometimes people miss it. Some people get, wait, what?
I'm surprised that a Liverpudlian delivered it.
Why?
Why? Because the Beatles are idolised in Liverpool. And it's clearly a play on the fact that everyone knows where they were when John Lennon was shot.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm surprised a Liverpudlian wanted to deliver that line.
I think it was just probably because it's like another one of these kind of absurd kind of modern day kind of references, but with fictional futures. Again, I always jump to the Peter Beardsley.
Yeah.
Peter Beardsley, Romeo and Juliet. Or was it West Side Story? I can't remember. Basically, the romance film starring Peter Beardsley. That's the crowning. That's the crowning achievement. That's the level. So far, as I've been rewatching along with this, nothing's beaten the Peter Beardsley line in terms of just absurdness. But
speaking of West Side Story, the way that Chris Barry delivers that the whole William Shakespeare stuff, and he's on the verge of like breaking up of laughter is just brilliant. I just love how he's literally wincing with trying to like laugh, and he has to hold it in. And the camera stays on him because it's a handheld camera, and it's just like you can totally tell he's laughing. It's just brilliant.
So let's talk about the Shakespeare thing. Rimmer loves William Shakespeare. In series 1, he referred to him as Wilfrid Shakespeare. It's another problem with the story here where the Smegups are dropping like flies.
He might have learned that it was William Shakespeare.
I think he's read the cover since then, I think.
Fine, I'm trying not to be bitchy about it, but it's worth it for the risk. I
can't believe the tables have turned that we're like trying our best to like keep it on.
It's because it's Shakespeare, and I was offended that they remembered Peter fucking Beardsley in 3 million years in the future, but they didn't remember Shakespeare, and now they do remember Shakespeare. So maybe that's good after all. And
there's a very, again, it doesn't leap onto it, but there's the idea that I think it's either, I can't remember, it was either Rimmer or Lister saying that, it might have been Rimmer saying that's the last copy of one of like the important works written by one of the most famous playwrights ever, and they're about to burn it. Because that probably is the last surviving copy of works of Shakespeare. But then again, though, if those books have lasted 3 million years without like degrading into dust, then there's probably...
That's true. They must be made of plastic. They wouldn't have burned. More Smegups!
But the idea being is that they've got a lot of the stuff that they've got there is probably the last copy of anything. The last copy of Lolita or the last copy of the complete works of Shakespeare. And in their hand they have the last... So if they ever do find a way to kind of continue the human race, culture, like the Earth culture, would have just vanished.
But Shakespeare burns, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And Lister eats dog food. And there's no books left. And they're looking at whether or not they should burn his soldiers. But they go into this really deep discussion on what matters, stuff or sentiment and selfishness, and what's worth more, money or memories. And Rimmer burns the money before he burns the stuff that's of sentimental value to him, which perhaps you wouldn't have predicted at the start of the episode.
No, you're right there. You're right. It is interesting how this whole story is about that sentiment, isn't it? It's about, as Matt alluded to, the culture, what what's dear to them, what can you hold on. I mean, even like sort of go back to the whole virginity thing. That's still like sentimental, isn't it? So everything's all about what it means for somebody, what things mean to people.
Yeah,
and it's just really interesting how they managed to put that into the episode without really, until you start thinking about it, without actually, again, Red Dwarf being the way it is, it actually goes deeper than just a laugh and two people stuck on a planet alone.
Yeah, and I think it really is very good at depicting how something that is completely different for one person can have zero value compared to the more value than anything you could put into words. You know, I don't care about a guitar or a camphor wood box, but if you took away the seal, if you took away the cuddly seal, that's the last thing that my grandma gave to me before she died, that's worth more than anything I could ever put into words. And they do such a good job about the sentimentality of these items by making them two completely different items for two completely different people, but going into the real value of what those things bring to those people.
Yeah, for example, when this talks about his guitar and how much it means to him, and what it and basically the symbolism that is attached to it. So like you kind of build it like a personal mythology based on the experiences and the sentimentality of like objects and what it means to them and stuff. And that's what the guitar kind of meant to Lister. He goes, yeah, it's only got 5 strings and 3 of them are G. I mean,
well, you know, no one in the world wants, well, very, very few people in the world want a cuddly seal, and no one wants that cuddly seal any more than, I'm sorry, I'm looking at it now, and it's completely shat on when Rimmer goes for a walk, having told him to burn the guitar, and he cuts a guitar shape out of the camphor wood chest and burns it, pretending that it's his guitar. After all this really deep and meaningful stuff, Lister's a massive bell end.
Well, it's interesting though, because what I think is interesting in it, that it's obviously placing everything on the soldiers, and the twist is it was the actual chest that was most dear to him, and we've talked about this before with Lister, that when he makes a massive fuck up, he's realised just how bad he has been, and I think you have to take that level of like, yeah, all right, well, my guitar's worth so much to me, and this is what it means to me. And he's obviously gone, well, the soldiers and whatever, the chest is just the chest, that I'll cut that or do that. And he just doesn't, there seems to be, this is the second time it's happened to him, where he doesn't quite understand the reason or the thing that is really pertinent to Rimmer. And obviously when Rimmer comes back and does his whole spiel there, and Lister realizes it, you know, it's heartbreaking. You know, it really is, the way he delivers it as well.
And just realize as well that Rimmer walked outside and was unfazed by the whole, and not affected by the thing. Why didn't you just like spend ages walking around trying to find something? I just realised that.
Because there was too much snow, they couldn't find any wood. Wasn't that why Lister was out there in the first place?
Yeah,
but why did Rimmer go out if he's not affected?
To give him some time with his guitar, if you remember.
Yeah, no, we're just saying like, why send Lister out if Rimmer could just wander around without not being affected?
We're trying to find a way to contact the others. So, but yeah, we don't. But yeah, it's just one of those niggle things that we don't talk about.
But I think,
does Rimmer feel cold and hot?
No, he doesn't. But he also can't smell. We'll come on to that.
But he can smell.
Well, yeah, he can in this episode. He can't in any others.
He also uses the panel, even though he shouldn't be able to touch it. Mayday.
This is definitely the worst episode for errors, I think. And I just don't think I care, because it's so good and it's so interesting and it is really, really funny in some places. but I can't think of another episode that is as bad as this.
I never thought of that Ascension Sunday thing. It's a great joke as well.
But I love that it shows the infallibility of everyone, even people that are good, in inverted commas, because there's a complete role reversal here. It's Rimmer that's incredibly noble, and Lister's a massive, selfish, sneaky shitbag.
Lister's usually the one who's not. I'll be interested to see if this ever crops up again. Is there any other moments where Lister goes to the level he does here? I mean, I think Rimmer's probably done a few kind of self-serving stuff before, but I can't think of Lister doing anything as bad as this.
What did he do? I can't remember what it was he did.
He basically cut his Rimmer's chest.
Yeah, no, sorry. I mean, before, because me and Mark have talked about this on a previous episode about he did something and I can't remember what it was.
Oh, he's never done stuff deliberately before. Like, for example, when he erroneously gave Rimmer a memory that fucked with him, that wasn't deliberate. Whereas this is clearly deliberate and clearly an act of pure selfishness and lies.
There was the case, particularly thanks for the memory, where there was a noble reason, misguided, yes, but there's always but he had a kind of noble reason to give Rimmer that memory. So it wasn't kind of a self-serving thing. It was just to try and give Rimmer an experience that he never had. Whereas here, this was pretty much him kind of lying about destroying one of his key things and pretending to come across as noble when he wasn't. I mean, to his credit, I think Lister immediately he's incredibly guilty basically, and then never fully admits it until he has to. But I don't think he's done anything as kind of self-serving as this. This is the most Rimmer this is something that you'd see Rimmer do. This is the most Rimmer that Lister's been so far.
I think it's important to not portray Lister as whiter than white, though. And I think this is quite brave in as much as it really does go further than you might have expected. But I think it's important that everybody is going to go a bit crazy and going to be a bit selfish in the situation that they're in.
Yeah, and he is fallible, isn't he? At the end of the day, it's people make mistakes, but you're right. It was thanks to the memory, and yeah, it is interesting that both episodes, Matt, that you particularly like, do have this element to it. I know that it's different. I know that I can clearly see the dividing line between the two, but it is interesting now. It's like the choices that are made on each other that seem to be the points of this. And you know, I mean, as I say, in his defence, he wasn't going for what he believed to be the sentimental part, but it still was avoiding his, and it's difficult. I think
one of the key reasons that I probably really like Red Dwarf is that I think one of the big things that attract me to it is that I really quite like the Rimmer and Lister relationship, and particularly the episodes which kind of get under each other's skin, and how they have to how they react to each other. That's probably the commonality between this one and Thanks for the Memory in terms of how they interact with each other and how they bounce off and stuff. And there's quite a bit of development for both of them as well. So I never really thought about that kind of connective reasoning between the two of them before. But yeah, it probably makes sense why I probably like those two.
So yeah, we've touched on it already. Rimmer smells that it's camphor wood and is more impressed because he thinks that the guitar was made of camphor wood, blah, blah, blah. And holograms can't smell. Let's just ignore that. And then the soldiers burn. We've covered this scene, I think. And then a nice little bit of light relief. Oh my goodness, the earmuffs on Crichton and the hat that the cat has when they're coming through the snowstorm. Best outfits ever.
Yeah. Well, they talk about the in the quarantine thing, going back to the quarantine thing, they talk about the sledge that they were on, and what Edby wanted to do was have the sledge more of a wide shot, so you can actually see the sledge itself. But they couldn't put the chrome key on it. It just didn't work. It was becoming too invisible when they tried to sort of kind of blue screen it out kind of thing. So they have to change the color of it to make it stand out so it doesn't become see-through. So they had to have these really tight up images of Cat and Crichton to avoid seeing the sledge itself. And I think there was a scene where they were meant to go mush, and it does happen, but it happens off screen, so you don't actually physically see it. Right. So there was the scene there that was meant to be a bit more visual than it actually became. It is that when you watch it back, it is very noticeable that you've got you zoomed in because the quality is degraded somewhat.
I was just enjoying earmuffs and hat. This is why I think they got away with it because of the sharpness of the outfits. But I'll probably have another watch back and go, "Oh, that was obvious. I'm an idiot."
I don't think you'd be an idiot. I don't think I noticed. I think it's one of those things where you just, because Red Dwarf has so many of these chrome key things, like thanks for the memory anyway, where you can see through Lister's hair or you can see through Rimmer's hat and stuff like that. You just get used to it because it's obviously of its time, and they were trying to do the best of its time. So it's not like, it's not like, and I'll always go back to this, The Matrix Reloaded, where you've got the Keanu Reeves fighting for the good first 5 or so minutes, and then it goes computer graphic-y straight after it, and it's like, oh, and it just stands out because it's like it was so good until that point, and then it just goes to this computer graphics scene, and the whole fight's like 12 minutes long, but it's like, oh, it's taking me right out. Whereas you're used to it in Red Dwarf because they're using the things that they can use at the time. They're at the leading edge of that technology, and they're using it as much as they can. And if it does fail on occasion, they try their best, and you don't really notice it as much.
On my other podcast, Right in the Childhood, which is basically comparing children's TV shows, is that when I show 24-year-old Fraser, my co-host, stuff that was cutting edge in the 80s, he just simply can't get into it because he can't suspend his disbelief for something like the Tripods or Doctor Who or even Robin of Sherwood he struggled with. And we're looking at this from people who remember it as it was at the time and are giving it some leeway. But I think if someone in their 20s looked at this, they'd probably think it was naff.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, it's difficult for us, isn't it? Because we've been in that world, so it'd be an interesting feat to bring someone on who may not, and give them the worst episode that we could think of that has it.
So the soldiers are burning and Rimmer salutes them. Lister is feeling like shite and tells him that he needs to tell him something. Did you notice that this is the first time that Rimmer had called him Dave?
No,
actually.
And I think it's from he believes their friendship has grown stronger because of the sacrifice, and he calls him Dave, which just adds to more of the cringe. I'm pretty sure it's the first time he calls him Dave. It's certainly something he hasn't done very often if he has done it before. And it's even more fucking heartbreaking, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's, again, we do see you can see the guilt on basically Craig Charles just looks like the most guiltiest person ever when he just walks in, grabs it, and then just kind of shuffles off and tries.
He has good guilt face.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cat arrives and Crichton arrives shortly afterwards. Crichton's got food and explains that they've been searching for them. Holly confirms that the black holes were grit on the scanner. Rimmer sings Lister's praises about honour, and then Lister collects his hidden guitar. Rimmer checks the trunk, discovers what Lister had done, and asks Crichton to get him a hacksaw.
Quite I'm going to do to Lister what Alexander the Great once did to me.
I absolutely love that. I love that line. It's just the thought of it as well.
it's payoff. It's like things building up and paying off, and like references calling back, and like a joke that you just keep building towards, and it's just a great payoff. I love that line. I love this episode.
But not only that, the other payoff is the bit when it's like, yeah, it was 5 specks of grit. And it's like, oh, they did this for nothing.
Yeah. The thing about grit,
So-
right, is that it's black. You have to wear space yet.
I think that is my quotable. It's like the thing about space, right? It's black. The thing about black holes, they're black.
We have kind of gone more into the deep and meaningful and kind of social commentary of this episode, but it would be wrong to not heavily emphasize how fucking funny this episode is as well. There's some incredibly good lines, and obviously the ones you've just quoted are a few of them, but it's a brilliant episode because I feel like with Red Dwarf, if you're watching it for the lols, you'll always get the lols. If you want to take a step back and spot some of the heavier sci-fi or heavier social commentary, there's always something in there too. But this episode is strong on both.
Yeah, what I find it really interesting, just on these first 2 episodes that we've done now, is that, you know, it's the first real time that we've had any major critical, and we've had critical analysis of all the episodes, seasons 1 and 2, and we've had moments. But these 2 episodes we've been quite critical of, and it's just interesting. It's almost like that moment in music where, you know, the 3rd album is the one that's selling out a little bit. And I don't by any means mean that, because we've all said that 3 to 6 is the best part of Red Dwarf. And I wouldn't say that's any different. I just think there's a difference between what season 1 and 2 did compared to what 3 onwards do. And it's interesting that we've been a bit more critical of the last 2 episodes. And it'd be interesting to see if that kind of follows on in the next, next 3 seasons.
If I'm going to rave about something, I will try and find things that I can say, this was great, but there's this that isn't so good. And similarly, if I'm going to absolutely pan something, then I do try and find some good. It's very, very rare that I can't do that.
But you're right with this particular episode. I think you're right. The jokes are really, really strong. I don't. As an episode, this is an episode that's memorable. It's one of the classics. It's really strong. And you know, the likes of last week, we talked about backwards. The concept is high. It's a really good thing, but then it kind of falls apart with its thoughts. Where if you look back at some of the season 1 episodes, like even as early as the 2nd or 3rd episode of season 1, the concept works really well. Future Echoes, you know, for example, it's almost like they're just trying to push that a little bit harder, but the quality overall has changed. You know, the look, the style, the feel, the jokes in this one I think are really, really strong. You know, and you know, even by thinking some of the stuff that you've thrown out there with some of the kind of like the consistency is not there, but I never really focused on that, even though I do tend to pick stuff like that up. I haven't really focused on that on this episode until we've gone through it today. So it's really interesting.
I think it's because this is the episode in my head that has the most inconsistencies.
Yeah.
And I'm probably not going to be critical of inconsistencies in the future. And we've said we're not going to focus on them, but it would do a disservice to the fandom of Red Dwarf to not at least acknowledge that we are aware of the inconsistencies, because they've acknowledged themselves when they released the Smeg-Ups. It wasn't just bloopers. It was, we fucked up with the continuity there. So the Smeg-Ups wasn't quite as simple as it'll be all right on the night. It was a very Red Dwarf feel.
Well, I think though this episode does have one of the more noticeable ones, because of how pivotal the information given out has been in both episodes. So the tale of Rimmer's virginity has actually been key. Well, it was key previously, like key in other episodes, but here it's like a big thing. And the fact that it's kind of like portrayed as like just being brand new information, it's easy to notice. I mean, particularly if someone's watching this one after the other, it's not going to be that long. If someone's like binging Red Dwarf, there's what, 2 hours of content between Thanks for the Memory and this.
But you've got to remember the time. There was no such thing as binging, or at least not until they were released on VHS. So it wasn't pitched at a binging generation, and they could have probably got away with it a little more than you could now.
True.
But maybe not, because I used to binge the videos thinking about it before we had the term binge to describe it.
Yeah, and but before this time of year, this time as well, you didn't have what people would assign to as diaries, would you? Or the Bible, the show Bible, as many people have now within the show, that everything's mapped out. This is kind of like, you know, the jokes and the episode itself comes first, and if there's anything that's like slightly out of that, then, you know, so be it. And it wasn't as thing. And we know we've talked about this before with the Star Trek element of, you know, the fact that a ship's got to be a certain design, or this has got to be that, that's got to be this. Red Dwarf isn't that. It's a comedy first and foremost.
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's a sitcom, not a serious science fiction. So that's about it for Marooned. But before we go, Kurt, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on that internet on Twitter at rmuldrake. That's RMULDRAKE. I'm on a whole host of different shows. I've been on Observing the Pattern. I've been on Pick a Disc, which is obviously Matt's. I've been on my own Xcast, which is the X-Files. Time Is Now, which is the Millennium podcast at the Time Is Now pod. And Make It So, which you can find at Jean-Luc Podard, which is a Star Trek Picard podcast. But the best place, if you're going to see what I'm up to, is on my personal Twitter at rmuldrake.
Matt, what about you, mate?
You can find me online. You can my personal Twitter account is ZanMatt or XandMatt. And you can listen to my podcast, which is Pick a Disc, where people go onto an album and talk about an album that they've picked. So it's not really that clever a name thinking about it, but yeah.
And as for me, if you're looking for me on Twitter and Instagram, it's at MarkAdamsHC. I have 3 podcasts. Like Kurt, I'm a little bit of a podcast whore. I've got Super Tat Film Club, which is a weekly B movie podcast at Tat Club on Twitter. I've also got Right in the Childhood, which is a fortnightly podcast about 2 different generations looking at each other's kids' telly. That's at RITC Pod on Twitter. And finally, I have also got Life's Milestones, which is a podcast based around my job as a humanist celebrant at Life's Milestones on Twitter. And all of the shows we've mentioned, if you're listening to Shipwrecked and Comatose, whatever you're listening to us on, you can listen to all of our shows on that. Just have a little searchy search. So, thank you very much for joining us for Shipwrecked and Comatose. And until next time...
Awooga.
Elsewhere on We Made This. The Time Is Now, a Millennium podcast.
But no, I mean, I will say that Rise of the Machines also kind of like argues against
Terminator 2, of course.
Back to where it was.
Like Rise of the Machines, like then goes, maybe they're both right, and shrugs its shoulders. It's like, maybe you can prevent Judgment Day, but only for a little while. And it's like, that's not an argument. Pick a side, pick a lane. You can either change the past or you can't. None of this wishy-washy. You can change it sometimes, but you can't really change it. So it all balances out. Yeah, no, pick a damn side.
Don't say the C word.
On the back of my right arm, I have a tattoo of Phil Collins. It's the front cover of No Jacket Required.
This was the one that I expected you to pick, I'll be honest with you. Because it is my favourite of your tattoos.
Yeah. I mean, It was a tattoo I got as a joke. A lot of my tattoos that I've got, a lot of everything that I do is because it's a joke or if I think something's funny.
We Buy Records.
Eric Clapton and Van Morrison have released an anti-lockdown song. How do you think about this? Where does this sit on the shitometer?
I think it redefines the shitometer.
Right.
So I think it's raising money for musicians who are affected by the lockdown and the lack of gigs, etc., which is a good thing.
Yep.
But then you see Van Morrison and Eric Clapton, a bad thing. So,
right.
Do you know what I mean? I love Van Morrison's music. I don't particularly like Eric Clapton's music. I quite like the 60s stuff. But they're a couple of whinging old men, aren't they? Old man babies complaining that they can't go and lick whoever they want.
Ooh.
I know, but that's what they're singing about. I think I haven't checked that. I assume that the lyrics are about.
You can take it as read that I haven't heard it.
It's not likely to have a banging donk on it, is it?
It's unlikely to have a banging donk.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North. You can find us on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod, and we are part of the We Made This podcast network, which can be found online at wemadethispod.com or on Twitter at We Made This Pod.